I'd like to start by saying that I lead a pretty straight lifestyle, so I'm sure that what I saw and heard last New Year's Eve wasn't the result of a hallucination or being drunk, but was 100% real. I live on the outskirts of a typical small southern town, so some of my friends live further out in the countryside, accessible only by those dark rural roads. One of my friends, Ethan, lives with his family in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the area, which can only be reached by these roads. Every year, his family hosts a New Year's Eve party at their house, inviting all the family friends, including me. It's quite a fun occasion, so I always get excited to receive the formal invitation from Ethan's parents in the mail. The weather in the South can be quite strange in winter, and it didn't really get cold until a few days before New Year's Eve. I remember the freshly chilled air, along with the bumpy rural roads, made the drive to the house uncomfortable. I usually don't drive with high beams because I hate when other drivers blind me with theirs, but the darkness of the winding, narrow road made it necessary this time. The road was lined with dense trees on both sides, so even with high beams, it was hard to see exactly where the curves were. There were no other houses between the turnoff and Ethan's neighborhood, except for a solitary cabin that seemed to have been abandoned for years, although sometimes I saw lights on inside when I passed by. A few minutes into the drive, on a particularly straight section of the road, my lights illuminated something among the trees, something white against the darkness. As I got closer, I could see it was the figure of a person standing alone by the roadside. She didn't move or hide, just stood completely still with her back to the trees. It was a woman, evidently dressed in a white dress or gown, nothing appropriate for the cold. I didn't turn off the high beams out of caution, so I couldn't make out specific details in the reflective glare of the white dress. As I passed her, I was thankful for my good luck that she didn't step into the road, forcing me to stop. But then I started to wonder if I should have stopped to see if she needed help. Perhaps she was another guest trying to get to Ethan's party. It wasn't until I looked in the rearview mirror and saw in the red glow of my taillights that the woman had turned her body to follow me, still frozen in that same spot. It was definitely creepy, and at that moment, I was glad not to be the best example of a good Samaritan. There was no way she was a guest at the party. I arrived at the party without further incident around 7 p.m., parking in the gravel circle among the dozen cars outside Ethan's house, situated in a large clearing in the surrounding woods, just like the other spaced-out houses in the neighborhood. The festivities continued until we watched the ball drop in Los Angeles, as well as the clock in our time zone striking 11, after which everyone slowly began to leave. I stayed a bit to help clean up, as I usually did, being one of Ethan's family's closest friends. When I finally left, my car was the only one left in front of the house. Upon starting it, a low tire pressure light came on. My car is an old model, so it didn't give me exact details on which tire was low or how many had the issue. Before panicking, I remembered this always happens with my tires when the weather turns cold after a long, warm period. I thought I could make it home fine, but before leaving, I remembered the woman I had seen on my way. Would she still be out there? Had anyone else encountered her? There was another route in the opposite direction I could take to get home and avoid that road, but it would add about 20 minutes to my drive, which I didn't want to do so late at night, with potential drunk drivers around. I decided to just go back the way I came. I really wish I hadn't. Just a few minutes on that same dark road, I felt something was wrong with my tires. I also heard it. It sounded like bare metal scraping against the asphalt. Slowly, my car came to a complete stop. I muttered to myself, this was a completely different situation. All that went through my mind was, did my tires fall off? Against my better judgment, I had to get out of the car to see what was wrong. Stupidly, I turned off the engine and closed the door, which made the car lights turn off automatically, plunging me into the deep darkness of the surrounding woods. With my phone's flashlight, I checked each of my tires. My heart sank to see they were all shredded, as if they had been torn by some animal's claws. I might have thought that if one had a big puncture, the bumpy road could have caused more damage, but all 4 tires, this was deliberate. I stood there hopeless. No one would be on that road at that hour, even on New Year's Eve. I would have to call a tow truck or someone to come get me. But of course, I might have thought that if one had a big puncture, the bumpy road could have caused more damage, but all 4 tires, this was deliberate. I stood there hopeless. No one would be on that road at that hour, even on New Year's Eve. I would have to call a tow truck or someone to come get me, but of course, there was no phone signal in such a remote place. Just as I was about to return to the car, the gentle wind stopped. The tree branches ceased moving, and even the wildlife that was still active this time of year went silent. I froze. I had never heard such silence, as if time had stopped for a minute. Then, I heard the unsettling sound of a branch snapping somewhere among the trees. Something was moving. I instantly turned off my phone's light, plunging into complete darkness. The leaves on the ground continued to crunch, as if someone was stalking in the woods. Was it a squirrel, a deer? No, this was the kind of silence prey makes when a predator is near. And then I heard, "I see you." My stomach dropped. All the air left my body. I couldn't even scream. It was a woman's voice, soft and calm, coming from the total darkness of the tree line, no more than 15 feet away. She said it without malice, which somehow made it even more terrifying. At that moment, all I wanted to do was curl up on the ground and die. Then I heard, "Can you see me?" It wasn't until I heard the voice again that my fight or flight response kicked in. I was disoriented, standing there in the darkness. I had to turn on my phone's light if I wanted to see which direction to run. I pointed the flashlight directly in front of me, and, standing at the edge of the tree line, was the woman in the white dress. This time, her features were visible. The dress was dirty, covered in dark stains. She was deathly pale, thin as a stick, and her gray, disheveled hair fell to her elbows. Her face was almost indescribable, grotesque, as if half of her jaw was missing, but she seemed to be trying to smile at me. In my indecisive horror, I kept the flashlight focused on her for a few moments before running down the road back to Ethan's house. The cabin I had mentioned earlier was closer to my current position in the opposite direction, but what if this woman was the one who actually lived there? I don't know if that was a rational thought made in the heat of the moment, but I didn't have time to question it as I ran down the road. I could hear the branches snapping and the whisper of leaves behind me. She was chasing me, but I quickly lost her with a huge adrenaline rush. I reached Ethan's house again, ignoring the rest of the neighborhood, and banged on the door, begging to be let in. His mother opened the door and quickly ushered me inside upon seeing how shaken I was. I explained everything to her, Ethan, and his father. They were understanding, offering me to stay there that night while they called the police and a tow service, which I gladly accepted before contacting my own family. The police said they would search the area around the road that night, and that I could retrieve my car and make a statement the next day. But all I wanted to do for now was leave that night behind and sleep in the guest room. I soon discovered the night wasn't over. I woke from sleep to the sound of a light tapping on the second-floor window. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. I remember the time exactly. 2:45 a.m., of course. None of the room's windows had blinds. I didn't dare look outside until I heard the muffled voice from outside, the same voice saying, "I see you." The woman was still there. She had followed me here, and was now throwing stones to get my attention. If I wasn't going to look out the window before, I definitely wouldn't now. I wasn't going to leave my place in that bed or sleep until morning, when the sun came up and Ethan's family woke up. Fortunately, the woman was no longer there. I told them what happened, and we all looked outside together before the police arrived. In the yard, near where I had heard the voice, Ethan's father found a large, rusty knife that didn't belong to the family. Presumably, it was what the woman had used to slash my tires. This also meant she had followed my car to the party at the start of the night, and had specifically chosen me when everyone else was inside during the festivities. Ethan's parents called other party guests to ask if they had seen anything suspicious the night before. One of their friends mentioned seeing someone in a white dress walking outside from the window, but didn't think much of it, as people were coming and going all night. When I gave my statement to the police, I suggested they check the cabin on the road, as I had a hunch the woman had something to do with it. Eventually, the police did, and they informed me that they didn't find anyone living there, but there were dead and gutted animals scattered around the surrounding woods. The woman I saw was never found, which of course raises many questions. The most terrifying for me are how she could follow me so quickly once I left the party, and if so much of her face was missing, how she could speak those words so clearly. Despite what happened, I still plan to go to Ethan's house for New Year's Eve this year, but this time I'll make sure to carpool with someone and take the longer route. When I was 28, I took a trip to Miami by plane. I stayed with a friend for a few days and booked a late flight back home. My flight landed at midnight, and by the time I got off the plane and reached the ground transportation pickup point, it was around 12:15. I hailed a random taxi in the taxi section and gave the driver my home address. The driver said he would take me for $33, which was a good deal compared to Uber. He got out to help me put my suitcase in the van's trunk, but I told him I was fine with having it in the seat next to me. So he placed my suitcase on the left seat behind him. I was sitting diagonally from him. He got in the car, entered my apartment address, and we set off. At that time, my apartment was about 25 minutes from the airport without traffic, and at that hour there was obviously no traffic. We got on the highway and were moving fast. I noticed the driver staring at me through the mirror twice. The second time, he asked where I was coming from. I told him Miami, and he replied, "Oh, very nice." Then he asked what I was doing there. I said I was just visiting a friend who lives there. His response was, "Is your friend as pretty as you?" Honestly, my first reaction was to laugh, but I found the comment really unsettling, and being the third thing he said during the ride, it didn't help. From there, his questions took on a flirty tone. He asked what a pretty girl like me was doing traveling alone. I responded with a bit of sarcasm, saying I had already mentioned I wasn't alone, that I was visiting a friend. His response was that by flying alone, I was traveling alone. I kept my sarcastic tone and told him we could agree to disagree. He laughed and said he was just joking. This man must have been around 50, and I felt that flirting with a 22-year-old girl alone was a bit creepy. It wasn't the first time I had dealt with something like this. As we continued on the highway, I saw the familiar overpass right by my exit, but as we passed it, he wasn't slowing down. I told him that was my exit just as we were about to pass it, and we missed it. I repeated louder that it was my exit. He apologized and said he would take the next one. I tried to glance at his screen to see if he had entered the correct address, but it was at an angle that didn't allow me to see it. The next exit was a mile ahead. I sat a little more on the edge of my seat. As we approached the next exit, I told him loudly and clearly that he needed to exit there. Without acknowledging me, he turned on his blinker and veered off the exit. I noticed him staring at me through the mirror for a second. I almost felt a hint of annoyance on his face, but I guess that quickly changed when, not a minute later, he asked if I had a boyfriend. I instantly replied yes, that he lived with me. I noticed he looked at me again, and I think he realized how quickly I responded. He asked what my boyfriend's name was. Yes, seriously. I decided that was enough. I told him I was going to put on my headphones, so I put on my AirPods, even though they were almost out of battery. I just wanted this man to stop asking me questions. Asking my boyfriend's name was a whole new level of weirdness, almost like he was interrogating me. I texted my family and close friends about this creepy taxi driver and shared my location just in case things got ugly. We were now in a familiar area of my city. We stopped at the first red light since we left the highway. I looked in the mirror and only saw his eyes staring at me in an almost threatening way. I know he didn't say anything because there was no music or anything playing, so I would have heard it. The light turned green and he kept staring at me. I had to tell him the light was green for him to start moving again. No one in my family was responding, except my older brother, who must have been the only one awake, but he lives 2 hours away from me. My brother told me I should get out of the car if I felt threatened or in danger. We were now on a main road in my city, but there were no cars on the road. It was approaching 1:30 a.m. on a weeknight. I ran toward the police car. Instead of getting out of the car and chasing me for my money, the driver just kept driving, which was already a big red flag. When I saw him drive away, I stopped running and quickly approached the police car. The officer saw me, rolled down the window, and I explained that the taxi driver gave me a really bad vibe and that I had gotten out for my safety. I asked the officer if he could take me home, and fortunately, he told me to get in the back seat. Being a scared woman obviously helped, but I don't think you should ask the police to be your free taxi service. By the time I was in the car, the taxi was already gone. The officer drove me home, and we arrived in about 5 to 10 minutes. I went in and didn't even bother unpacking. I went straight to brush my teeth and to bed. It seemed like I had barely laid down when I heard a knock on my apartment's front door. What if it was the taxi driver? After all, he had my address. What if he was coming for his money or something worse? The knocking persisted for a few minutes, then stopped for a while and then started again. Obviously, I never left my room. I didn't want to be near the front door. The door was locked, and that was what mattered. Finally, the knocking stopped, and I fell asleep. The next day, I went back to work. Fortunately, I had a slightly later shift, so I didn't have to get up too early. While I was at work, I received a call from my neighbor Matthew. He said my dad had been there earlier, trying to get into my apartment to leave something, but he didn't have a key. Matthew called to confirm if I was really expecting my dad, and I told him no, I hadn't heard anything from him. Matthew said he didn't see him leave anything. He was just looking through the windows, which caught his attention. I thanked him and then called my dad. As I expected, my dad said he was at work and hadn't been by my house. I took the opportunity to explain the whole taxi driver situation to my dad, but this time over the phone. He wanted me to come home for a few days, and I said I would. I just needed to go home and pack my things first. After work, I got home around 8:30 p.m. I finished my laundry from the night before and packed a bag with some clothes and my work stuff for the next few days. However, something in my apartment felt strange. I'm never nervous about being alone, but that night I felt like I wasn't alone. Deep down, I felt it was because the whole taxi situation had unsettled me, but I kept hearing small creaks on the wooden floor, like the pressure of someone's weight. I couldn't pinpoint where they were coming from. Honestly, I was scaring myself and tried to hurry to gather all my things and leave. It was just when I was ready to leave the house that I heard a creak in the hallway from the guest bedroom. I turned and heard a voice say, "I wasn't going to hurt you," and saw an arm peek out from behind the wall. I ran to the front door before he could even step into the hallway. I was outside screaming and banging on my neighbor Matthew's door. It was still early enough for him and his wife to be awake. They rushed out, and I asked for help. Instead of going into my apartment, we called 911 and waited for the officers to arrive before going in. My apartment wasn't big, so checking every possible hiding spot didn't take long. The sliding back door leading to the shared patio area was open, which also suggested he had fled through the backyard. Unfortunately, I didn't have any record of the taxi ride I took, so I didn't have the taxi number or license plate or anything. I could only describe it as a yellow minivan and give the man's description. However, I described the route we took and the time I remember arriving in the city, hoping they might knock on some local businesses' doors and check their cameras pointing at the streets. I grabbed my already packed bags and headed to my parents' house, where I stayed for a week. They wanted me to stay even longer, but I had to go back home. My dad helped me install some Amazon cameras on the front and back doors, and I also bought a taser to keep by my bed for personal defense. I've lived in 2 different apartments since this experience. I've never had to use the taser. I also avoid taxis now if I'm alone, as they are much less traceable than a rideshare app. Plus, you always hear stories of fake taxi drivers kidnapping people. I have to wonder if that was a real taxi driver or if it was a stolen vehicle.